Et la présence du président du German Business Council via s'asseoir. Le sujet d'aujourd'hui est d'une extrême importance. 90% et plus de 90% des sociétés sont familiales dans la plupart des pays. Et il y en a des grandes, il y en a des petites, beaucoup d'employés, peu d'employés, mais elles sont toutes confrontées aux mêmes problèmes économiques, au problème de trouver des nouveaux marchés, de définir des nouveaux produits, de les développer. Mais aussi, on a le problème d'être confronté aux problèmes interfamiliaux. Comment désigner un nouveau successeur? Comment prendre des décisions au conseil d'administration? Comment passer de la deuxième génération à la troisième génération? Et ce sont des problèmes que souvent on sous-estime. Je vais vous donner deux exemples. Il s'agit de deux sociétés. Une est suisse, que vous connaissez tous, Carandache, qui a plus de 100 ans d'existence. La présidence est aux mains d'une femme, Carole Hubscher. La société appartient à la famille Hubscher. Et le CEO est depuis 10 ans un monsieur qui s'appelle De Saussure. Et la société se porte très bien. Elle a réussi à passer tous les problèmes qu'il y a eu depuis une douzaine d'années. Là, c'était aussi une famille qui a réussi à déterminer un nouveau venu en dehors de la famille. Je vous donne un deuxième exemple, qui est la famille Fatal, qui existe aussi depuis plus de 100 ans. Ça a toujours été la présidence et la direction aux mains de la famille. Et depuis un mois, ils ont réussi à désigner pour la première fois un non-membre de la famille, dont le nom est Khalil Daoud, et la présence est là, il représente la famille. Et on lui souhaite bonne chance, d'ailleurs. Je ne veux pas m'attarder plus. Notre conférencier a beaucoup plus d'expérience que moi dans ce domaine. Il s'agit de Dr Fady Rahme. Fady est maître conférencier à Sciences Po Paris. Il est dans plusieurs boards, conseils d'administration. Et il va nous parler des problèmes des familles et du challenge du futur. Donc je donne la parole à Dr Fady Rahme.
Opportunity to discuss this type of issues together. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Council for inviting me. I'd like to thank also Your Excellency for your presence and the presence of the leadership of the Embassy. And thank also the German Council for your presence, and thank each one of you for having taken the time to be with us tonight. The issues of families are not only... Sorry, now it works. Are issues that involve some management, some history, some geography, and some emotional issues. So we're going to go through them step by step. I'll try to stick to my 30 minutes or a bit less, and then we'll open the floor for questions, which will give you opportunities, and probably to all of us, to discuss wider scope than only what is on the slides. But the slides are made just to set up the scene and help us going through this thinking all together. So what is a typical family business in our region and mainly in Lebanon, since the majority of us are Lebanese and have business in Lebanon? So it is typically a family business that is born around the 50s and the 60s. It has been influenced, and this is something we rarely anticipate in terms of impact, by the war in Palestine, 1948, by the nationalization of corporations in Syria and in Egypt during the 60s that have brought into this country large industrialistic families, large trading families, a new way of thinking the business. It has usually a specialty, something they know more than someone else, and they bring an added value to the way they do business, and this added value combined with this specialty have brought them success. So they grew fast in the 60s, and this goes hands in hand with the growth of the Lebanese economy, and majority of them went regional in the 70s. So it means that they served the wave of the regional-driven revolution, which has been driven by oil. And in the 80s and the 90s, they continued to grow, while they were surviving the turbulence of a 20 years war in their homeland. And they had to adapt in the same time to the difficulty of their base and the need of growth that was open to them in a region. So this means that practically they have been managed by a founder at inception, by his children during the growth years. The third generation started to be on board in the 90s, and they have now to restructure, to rethink, to decide what they want to do, facing what we call the third generation challenges. The third generation challenges is not something that has been invented by management, but by sociology. Funny enough, it's a concept that goes back to the Middle Ages, where Ibn Khaldun, who was a philosopher and a sort of sociologist, was saying the empires cannot survive 3 generations, and the question was the combination of factors that have generated this power were structured around a founder who was a very strong personality, very strong know-how. The second generation have seen the first generation building the empire, so they know how much it has cost to make it happen. The third generation is born with a silver spoon in their mouth, so they cannot sustain the effort needed to maintain the empire. Was Ibn Khaldun correct? Some would say yes, some would say no. Nevertheless, in many family businesses you see, there is what we call the challenge of the third generation, and which is probably the challenge in many corporations in Lebanon. And it does not say that if there is a challenge, there is not a solution. But effectively, these type of problematics take place. So, to help more understand this, I'd like to share with you what we call the threats to perennity. If we consider that anyone who does a corporation would have a hidden dream to stay perennial, which means he survive any time. It is his desire of eternity to keep his company going on through his children, his grandchildren, and years after, because it gives him some impression that he's not dying anymore, that he will survive the time. So what it would be? It would be a family business who is a strong regional player on the regional market. He is a successful family, but with many branches now. And it is a tailor-made, formal and informal way of managing the company. So this is typically what you discover when you spend some time with corporations who are of a certain age in our region. You will find these 3 parameters. Some of them are very clear and simple. It is when we understand what is specific to them, locally and regionally. Something is more subtle. You have to discover it. You have to look behind the closed doors, which is all the part that is informal in their way of managing their businesses. And of course, the relation between the branches they have went through, because now they are more than brothers, they are usually cousins, have the subtle difficulties of any family. And this would generate what I call 3 metaphors, 3 stories that I will share with you, just to help us thinking the issues. So the first one is something I call the rigged game, le casino pipé, something that is rigged. The second one is, are we mixing grandma's table with the board of directors? And the third one is the entitlement culture. And this is very typical of any family business. Let's take them one by one. So what is the story of the rigged game? The story of the rigged game is the story of a friend of mine who went one day to play poker or any game you would know. And the first time he went to this casino or to this playing ground, he discovered that he has some talent for this game, that he can understand very precisely the rule and start winning. So the first time he said, probably I'm lucky. Then he continued to play, and when he won the second time, he said, probably I know something that makes me a good player, and I have a bit of luck. At the third time he won, or after a certain time he's continuously winning, he said, probably I'm the best player in the world. And the proof is in the eating. Every time I play, I win. So probably it is not luck. Probably it is not that I know something. It is not only that I know something, but I'm the best player in the world. And then suddenly the casino realizes that this guy is winning too much money. So he changed the rule of the game. He took him into what I call a rigged game. So part of it was still the rules he knew, but some others were things he does not know about. And he started losing. So how did he react? He reacted exactly the opposite of what he did before. So the first time he said, probably it is bad luck. I'm still the best player in the world, but this time I was not lucky. The second time he lost, said, probably they have changed something and I miss my luck in the beginning, but nevertheless, I will gain again and I will continue to play the way I used to play, because, again, the proof is in the eating. What I have done before was successful, so if I do exactly the same, I will be successful again. And then finally, he wastes his time trying to play the same way he was playing before, till he go bankrupt and they fire him from the casino. The story can apply to any family that did not see that born in a specific operating environment, having developed a specific know-how, the family succeeded locally and regionally, but what did it learn from the success? The issue becomes, if you learn that a bit of luck, a certain know-how, a particular operating environment has made of you a winner, to which you add a layer of know-how, you're on the safe side. But if, like my friend, you imagine that you're learning just because you are the best player in the world, there is an issue the day where the third generation comes to power and there is a change either in the nature of the business you do, because time has passed and the way you were performing business is now different, the business you do is different. We are all facing now digitalization, robotics, many businesses will disappear. A lot of people would tell us that 70% of the jobs we do today will not exist in 10 years. Your dentist will not exist in 10 years. Probably our grandkids will not drive cars. And all of this bring a transformation. And at the change in the nature of the business, are we asking ourselves the real questions? In many families, the question becomes a generational question. Are the third generation members of the family incapable? We were working more than you do. We were dedicating time and resources more than you do. And it becomes a generational problem, which is in fact not the real case. The second question is, how do we react when we face adversity? Do we continue to replicate the scheme we know till the moment we go bankrupt because we don't want to change? Or we accept the idea that the rule of the game in the casino has changed, so we have to change our way of playing? Last but not least, at which pace we decide to implement change. It is not only about understanding that things have changed. It is about taking the courage to say, things have changed, let's adapt to change the fastest way possible. Because what my friend in the casino did is to continue to play the old game till he go bankrupt. Should he have taken the decision to change the rule of the game quickly, he could have recovered part of the money he lost. So this is the first metaphor that I ask you to think about. the story of the rigged game where the rule of the game changes while you are playing, and how do you react to this? The second story I want to share with you is the story of another friend who was called to join the board of a family. And he always told me, you know, they are very logical when we talk to them one by one, but if we bring them to a boardroom, there is a layer of understanding that I cannot reach. The way they think, the way they act, the way they react is coming from somewhere else, but I don't know where it is. In fact, there is a player that grandma's table. Grandma's table in a family business brings to the board the stories that the board members, the non-family member of the board, does not know, and that sustain a lot of the decisions, which is the personal story of each one of the family members, which is the real story of what has happened during times where we were not discussing a board, but handling private issues. And these would lead practically to have two layers of thinking. One which is the official one that we know, which is the board of directors, and another one. And this would mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the competition we had when you were 10 years old and it was your birthday and grandma decided that the anniversary of someone else was more important than your birthday, so you've been kicked out, and I was called to attend this birthday and you were not called? Or are we discussing how do we create a new branch in our business in which I take leadership but you don't? Who are we talking about? And always this example. If we're discussing an important issue of the marketing director in one of our divisions, are we talking about the marketing director or about your son? It's not the same. The marketing director is someone we talk with no emotion. He's here just because he is fulfilling a role. If we start discussing with him because he is your nephew, we put on the table grandma stories. Ah, you did this because it is my son. If it was your son, you wouldn't have reacted that way. And suddenly we realize that sustaining the board, there is another table where a lot of decisions were taken or untaken, where a lot of events have happened, and you carry them with you to the board of directors. So there is a necessity here to see, are we talking about something that is personal or about something that is professional? The third story I'd like to share with you is something we call the entitlement culture. The entitlement culture generates a confusing management style, because the people who consider that they are entitled to have the management or the leadership role feel that they can dictate the rule of the game based on their own entitlement. Because I am the founder, I can do something. Because it is my money, I can do something else. And then we have a family. I took an easy picture of 3 generations where there is only one person. Each one of them is entitled to be the successor. And when they look to their wealth, the way they manage the assets or the wealth of the corporation, they have a wonderful mix between what is personal and what is the company's money. How can you explain to someone if the money he has in front of him is right pocket and left pocket, that he cannot decide on what is on the left pocket? It is his money. He did it. He is entitled to be the leader of this organization, and the organization is successful because he is bringing the success. Or at least, he thinks that he is bringing the success. So the way he approaches wealth, that at the second and the third generation is not his wealth. It is a collective wealth. He is considering himself entitled to manage it. He cannot confuse left pocket and right pocket. What is the issue if I take my family with me to a business trip? Anyhow, you're paying me my business trip. Am I the owner of this company or not? What is the big issue if I pass my bill to the company? I'm suffering to support this company by accepting to go to a trip. What is the issue if I take my family with me? I'm serving the company. And essentially, not to go deeper into this, in family businesses, in many of them, at this level, when things are not yet fully organized, we have to admit that a lot of informal is taking place. It has roots in the past. It could have a very good reason in the past. The issue is that it cannot continue in the future. And informal way of managing things carries in itself the bomb that will explode when the third generation will be in place. The second issue we'll have to think is that the leadership selection is dictated. The trace you have on the ground in your field is not right. It is not the fault of the small cow. It is the fault of the big bull. If the leader of the organization behaves wrongly, you cannot stop the small ones to behave wrongly. So this entitlement becomes a major problem in identifying the business priorities. Because people who are entitled or consider themselves as entitled consider that what is important for them is the priority for the corporation. It might not be true. It might not always be true. And if it has been true at the moment where they have created or managed the company, it might not be. And another time, in another operating environment, at another timing, the truth that everybody should follow on. So from these three stories, I would say these are the potential threats that are particular to family businesses. Of course, there are other threats which are related more to wrong strategic choices, but this can happen also in very structured corporations. But I want just to focus on these three and ask ourselves what could be the answers. The answers are very simple and at the same time extremely demanding and would need some time. The first thing is, at any point of time, a corporation should be able to redefine its operating environment. The casino have changed the rule of the game. Okay, let's redefine where we are, what are we doing? And this is typical for our region where there are a lot of changes coming, nature of businesses could change, etc. The second point is focus on your real added value. What is the thing that you can do or that you do or that you have done that makes you more competitive than others, that bring you an added value that your competition don't have, and is the essence of what your family business is. What is the business, the real business that you are driving, and can it survive the change of the operating environment? So this is for what we consider as a business at a point of time, and it is evolving. The second thing, which is the issue of mixing family and professional, this hidden boardroom. The only way to get out of it is to go back to an example we can see in politics. During the 60s, Lebanon had a president called Fuad Shahab. And every time he was facing a political problem, he would tell his aides, the solution is in the book. What does the book say? And he meant by the book, the Constitution. Same, it has to be in families. You establish a book, there is a governance model. And the governance model becomes the reference and becomes the layer between the table of your grandma where there is all your private stories and the boardroom where things should be taken as much as possible without emotions based on the book. What does the governance book says? And we obey all by this book. More so, the only way to ensure perennity which is to survive the changes of time, is to base any development you do on the book, to sort out any conflict you see by the book, but also being able to readapt the book to the needs of a changing family. Typically born in the beginning of the century, today a family business would be owned by 50 people, by 70 people. So none of them owns more than 4 or 5% of the company. Last but not least, the entitlement culture. The entitlement culture should be transformed for what it was in the beginning, but that we lost on the road. The first entitled one was the one who was the most performant. He created the company, he made it win because he was very performant at that time. So if we move from family-based entitlement to performance-based meritocracy, we change the set of mind not only of the family, but also of the employees. In one of the cases I know well, the decision is driven like this. The current CEO is the last one. The next one can be a non-family member. But the one after next should be someone who is in the company today. Because if you don't give your employees the opportunity to dream of one day becoming the leader of the organization, you lose them on the road. Never underestimate what is the impact of conflict within the family on 2 or 3 of your main partners. Your employees, they will run away. It is neither their duty nor their liability to wait till the end of a family conflict. If they have a better opportunity, they leave you. And you lose your best guys first, because these are those who can find rapidly another job. 2, you might lose your business partners, because these are worried about what's happening in your board and your ability to be the best business partner. Last but not least, you may lose your shareholders. In many family businesses, if you introduce shareholders and still put at the table conflicts of family nature, of personal nature, they will run away. And plenty of examples are here. I conclude by saying that the combination of these 3 answers could bring to corporations some perennity around the real added value, a proper governance model, and a meritocracy. Thank you.
And this is also another ego that should be eliminated. And there are plenty of intelligent and capable persons in the family who can really ensure the perennity, but they are not sure.
You're absolutely right. This is for us, goes under what we call the entitlement culture. So the eldest son should be the normal leader after his father, etc., which is unfortunately happening many times. But definitely it is not a sustainable model. It has succeeded in some cases and failed in many others. The entitlement is not a way of managing corporation. A meritocracy, an entitlement by meritocracy, is a way of managing a corporation. If it is just only a question of filiation or descendants, it might be successful, it might be a failure. Many families take time to understand that it is better for their descendants to have a company that is profitable but managed by someone else than putting the burden of the management on their own children who sometimes cannot do it and ruin the business. Security can come by having a CEO who is a non-family member. Maybe it will be too long to get into the detail of this approach, but you're absolutely right. There is no family chart that is something just written by a lawyer somewhere, someplace, and sent by parachute to a family, and it can work. Every family has a story. And the story is a constitutional element of their DNA. And any solution that is not adapted to the DNA of the family is a source of conflict in the coming years. So it is very important that people who works behind this chart are people who understand the dynamics of this family, their real know-how, their real expertise, and the way they can interact together. Because the book cannot solve all the problems. At a point of time, this book has to be interpreted to serve what is the real DNA of the family. So it's a combined approach between understanding what do they need, what do they want to reach, who is still interested and who is not. The sizes of the shareholdings is very important. Like I said, I know a family where the biggest shareholder would be someone who have 3 or 4% of the company, so why would he allocate time to an organization where he is a so small owners? While you have other organizations where there is still blocks of ownership, and then the book is also adapted to the reality of the problems they have. In parallel, the reality should not twix the book, because the rules of fairness, the rules that derives from the common sense, have to prevail. The feeling of injustice within any of the branches of the family is the time bomb that will explode 6 months later, a year later, or 10 years later. And we have to consider that in many family organizations, the option of an IPO is not a possibility. So anyhow, they will have to manage these assets on their own table. So there would be conflict about the valuation, there will be conflict about those who want to leave and those who want to stay, there might be conflict in strategies to adopt. So the book is not only a book written to represent the sensitivities of the family, it is a book also that should tackle problems that you can oversee from now in a fair way, just to make sure that the book plays its real role. But it has to be the layer that separate all what is emotional from what have to be, in a certain way, more scientific or more business-driven or more logically driven than twixt by our emotions. This is a very good model because it takes out the table of grandma from the underlayers of the board room. And it spares the company the pressure that could put on them people who are at the same time shareholders and managers. Because it's very difficult to see a conflict with someone who is in the same time your colleague and somewhere else your boss. Okay, so it's difficult to manage. Many companies have adopted the system because then only professionals are running the company. They are accountable vis-à-vis the real beneficiary owner who is in fact the supervisory committee and the board. And there is no emotion in the way we treat their performance. They are setting objectives. If they don't achievement, you can tell them, thank you very much, you've been a good help for the company, but now it is time to change. Imagine if you are saying this to your nephew. It will be harder, it will be more difficult, because he's a shareholder like you. So then it's creating a disbalance. The second thing is more an advice we give to any owner, either a family or a person or whatever. You cannot be at the same time the owner and the day-to-day manager of a corporation if you are not a direct CEO. Because the situation you will create is allow the CEO to tell you, I wanted to achieve a certain number of objectives, but you intervened. You imposed to me that choice or that other choice, and you are the shareholder, so I cannot say no. When it is separated, the roles are completely different, A supervisory board would give the executive committee some recommendation, would tell him, I think you should go that way, etc. But he will have to keep the executive committee operating and make him accountable at the end of the exercise. This separation is more healthy, but in many cases, in family businesses, at least during the first years, the family is still involved in the management. They still manage entities, they have a certain know-how, they build a certain expertise. So probably this distinction should come after a while, when effectively less and less family members are still operating within the company. Probably. No, the question of Karim is, are Lebanese more entrepreneur than managers? And the idea of family businesses keeping the family ruling comes from the fact that the leaders of the family are also entrepreneurs, not only managers. This is the eternal question. But a company, to be sustainable, should generate within its own culture the next generation of leaders. It is true that maybe in the beginning, the spirit of the founder, the spirit of the second generation, and this is what has driven the thinking of Ibn Khaldun. In the beginning, the soul of the operation is still within the family. They drive it, they are involved, etc. Usually, I think that if in the inception years, the priority is to be an entrepreneur, after a while, the sustainability and the perennity of the exercise is more about the ability of managing it. Okay? Except if you have to change completely the type of business you were doing and go into a new venture. But we should not consider that it is either or. It is a bit of both. You can maintain the culture, the entrepreneurial culture in a corporation beyond the years of the family. It's true that the crisis in Lebanon, that is only 2 years old now, will impact all the businesses. And the research for a solution might not be on your own territory. So, for example, I can imagine easily any family business in Lebanon looking for opportunities to export or to earn his keeps out of the Lebanese economy, the hyperinflation of the lira, and try to find sources of revenue that are more in what we call fresh dollars. Nevertheless, the corporations in Lebanon are still engaged, and for many of them, into the process of keeping their business going in Lebanon despite huge difficulties. How much can they influence is a question of political lobbying, the ability of private sector to influence the political decision. So we have witnessed a lot of groups who are trying to do that. Officially, we have an association of every type of industry or business in Lebanon, the industrialists, the traders, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. And all of them are trying to voice their opinions. But the crisis in Lebanon is not an economical crisis. The crisis in Lebanon is a political crisis. And on that, the private sector can influence, but cannot change the rule of the game. Changing the rule of the game today is to go back to fundamentals of politics. So this is not the topic of this talk, but the private sector and the family businesses are trying as much as they can through MPs or through a direct lobbying to carry their position to say on this, on that. But they are not unified, as you can imagine. And they don't have a position about capital control. They don't have a position about what do we do with the weapons of the Hezbollah. Or they don't have a unique position about who would be the best prime minister and under which format our government should work. So this is also the variety of our society and its different political opinions. But definitely we are a country that has the biased situation of economics driven by politics. So the political choices of the leadership are impacting directly the economical situation. And I don't see it reversing rapidly. I tend to think that the political problems are always superseding and will continue to supersede the financial and the economical problems. But having said this, corporations should organize themselves and should admit that the way we were performing business during the past 20 years is now obsolete, let's say. We have to imagine a different role, we have to imagine different markets, we have to imagine different ways of operating. So change is not something, when it happened, you wake up in the morning and you say, since yesterday there is a change, so I have to change. Unfortunately, change is something that is imposed on us and that we do not like to do. Even in our private life, we don't like change. So facing change is, first of all, questioning what you were doing for years. And it is not easy. Remember my friend in the casino, the cake is in the eating. I used to do it like this and I won and I had a lot of money. And it works. So if someone asks you to change your behavior, it is not easy. Majority of change I have seen did not come by a wise decision long before the change. It has come with the need to cope with a disbalanced situation that has hurt you in a way or another, and then you wake up and you say, I cannot wait longer, I have to change. And I think that probably this is what's happening with a lot of Lebanese organizations who did not ask themselves about the financial situation of their country during the past 20 years. Was it sustainable or not sustainable? Did not ask themselves questions about their interest rate that was so high, so why would I invest if I can earn so much money by doing nothing? Who did not ask themselves how their government is ruled and the debt was growing and growing, and for tens of years everyone was saying, you need to reform, we cannot help you if you don't reform. The reforms were not taking place, and we were continuing to consider that everything is going as normal. So probably we're hit more than other situations where it could have been better anticipated. But I'm extremely, extremely impressed by the resilience of private corporations in Lebanon, by their ability to think about the change and try to implement something as much as they know. But like any process, there will be collateral damages or direct damages. Yes, some corporations will not survive the change in the region and in Lebanon. They are not listed in the stock market. It is just, they are listed, but this is one of the oldest, let's say, family businesses. Hermes is a family business. Sorry? The Vandel family is, I don't know, 250 years or something. And it was not anymore one business. Yeah. They started in steel, and now they do many other activities. They are in distribution, etc. In Japan, you would find very old family business. The majority of the shares, not all the shares. Yeah, the Vandel family is still a major player in the corporations they own. As a family, and the family is ruled by a sort of very complicated management that can be owned by families. The old ones in the cars, for example, would be Peugeot. Peugeot, that is still the major. We don't know. We will wait. Maybe if we come back in 200 years and the Vandel are still here, we would say that it is more than 200 years. The ambition of being perennial has no limitation. In many political parties in Lebanon, it is a family business. And what I described here, my experience as a guy involved in trying to understand the politics in Lebanon, all the metaphor would apply. I will not give names, but everyone can understand easily that in many cases, political parties in Lebanon are family businesses with the issues of entitlement, with the confusion between the wealth of the party and the wealth of the family, with a succession planning process that is made at the table of grandma more than at the political bureau of the party, etc. So yes, we are a part of the world where families are important. We belong to families. We present ourselves through families, through regions, through identity, where family is an important element. So the idea we have to put on the table is that management is not about killing the family. Management is not about sorting out all what is bad in the family and say we have to throw it in the garbage. It's not true. These families have suffered, made huge efforts, create a spirit that have been able to do some success in a difficult environment. So we have to be grateful to what the previous generation have done, because they done it in very difficult times. Nevertheless, the perennity, which is the gratitude we owe to the previous generation, goes through rules. These rules cannot be avoided. There are issues you have to do if you want to be perennial, and it is a gratitude towards your family. And it is a service you render to those who are the weakest among your family members and need the wealth generated by the family to survive or even to raise their own kids. So if as a founder you have the feeling that you want to be perennial, you're not only doing this for ego purposes. You have to do this with in mind the one of your kids who is the weakest, not who is the strongest. The strongest can always find his way somewhere else, can leave the company and go earn his keeps alone. He can be as performant as you have been. But think about the weakest one, those who will need the money one day to sort very important problems. Those, if you keep them in mind, you always put ahead what is the best management system that will ensure perennity, and perennity will give them security. And then you are a good father, you are a good leader, you are a good head of this family. Do not say the shareholding has nothing to do. They'll wait till the distribution of dividends, the day the executive committee decide that there is $1 million to distribute. This is why we consider that the family board is the board of guidance. He is the guardian of the spirit in the company. He is the guardian of favoring the long term to the short term. And processes can be put in place to encourage people to work for the long term, mainly by basing part of the bonus of the managers on the results of the coming years. Few years ago, after I think the crisis of the subprimes, or even before it, we started seeing in many corporations something we call the long-term incentive plans, which is to say to the managers, we owe you $1 million bonus if in 3 years, this is our level of performance, in 5 years, this level of performance, etc. So he is incited to work for the long term. The issue is not how do we do it. These are technicalities, and there is always a solution for something that is technical. But I fully support your idea, Karim, that we should not keep the management focused only on his bonus at the end of the year, because he would ruin the corporation to milk the cow to the max for him to get his bonus and leave you with a nearly dead cow. And it has happened in many corporations, even those listed in the stock market. This is why you see that now fund managers pay attention to that. It's very easy to make a company profitable if you have a large marketing program. You kill the marketing program, you bring back the money inside, and you tell to the people, okay, this year we earned this much money. But we killed the future. We killed the brand, which is the main asset of the corporation. So definitely now there is a lot of maturity in all corporations to find this balance between the present and the future.
We're an association that is supposed to deal with businesses and network, so please try to meet each other and help each other. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate your company. Thank you, Fady. It was a great company.